The Heat are good, but are they good enough? That's the question that many fans are asking about the team. So to help us answer that, we're joined by Rohan Nadkarni of Sports Illustrated to discuss the season thus far, potential trade options, changes to the starting lineup, and much more on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucaneat.com. Joining me as always, longtime NBA reporter David Ramil. However you're tuning in, YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. Use the code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's JASE medical.com. We are stoked to be here with Sports Illustrated's Rohan Nadkarni. Stoked. I don't know the last time I used the word stoked. I don't know why that went out of my mouth.
Recently, I think. Pretty recently.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Maybe it's new in the West Head lexicon. Let's do it. Sports Illustrated's Rohan Nadkarni is here to talk about the Heat, who are 21-16, 1 game out of 4th place, 2.5 games out of 3rd, in a very packed Eastern Conference where the standings between basically 4 and 7 or 8 change every single night. Jimmy Butler's missed the last 5 games with a foot injury. We don't know when he's coming back. And on Wednesday, the Heat used their 20th different starting lineup of the season. Rohan, on one hand, you could see the injuries and look at the winning record and think, hey, they're in a great spot considering everything that they've gone through. On the other hand, you could look at all this never-ending parade of injuries and be concerned. Where are you on this Heat team right now?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say I'm full on concerned, but I would say that my expectations aren't necessarily super high for whenever this team gets fully healthy. And I also think it's dangerous to say everything's going to be fine if and when Jimmy Butler's healthy. And that's because we've now seen Jimmy have 3 deep playoff runs in the last 4 years. And that takes an effect on someone who is 34 years old and in his mid-30s. And I think just assuming that he's going to be perfectly healthy when he comes back the rest of the way, can stay perfectly healthy for the playoffs, is not fully realistic. Beyond that, it goes back to, you look at some of the teams that they're competing with, whether it's the Indiana Pacers, the New York Knicks, then there's the top 3 in the East, the Bucks, the Sixers, the Celtics. These are all teams that I think have made significant moves to try to improve themselves over the last 18 months. So I do think that they will be in a little bit better position. They're having a tough time. I mean, they played an 8-man rotation against the Thunder last night, for example. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's Eric Spoelstra's preference. And in fact, he shortened the rotation because it was getting tough with RJ Hampton's minutes and Jamal Cain's. He shortened the rotation. I don't think that's their preference. Like, even if they have Caleb Martin in that Thunder game, I think it helps them quite a bit. So I think getting Jimmy back, Kyle, Caleb, all these guys healthy at the same time will help them. I think they'll be a little bit better, but I don't know that it separates them necessarily from the group they're currently in the East.
Is we're talking about it, and I think I agree with you, where the ceiling of this team and the floor of this team might not be that big of a difference, right? Mm-hmm. Where you think about the ceiling of a team like, I don't know, Milwaukee, if they ever really put it together, that's a championship winning kind of ceiling. It doesn't sound like you're there with the Heat right now.
I don't have them as a championship team. When you look at their net rating, I think their net rating's under 2. It might even be under 1 after that Thunder game last night. I haven't checked yet. They haven't proven to be a championship contender really on any level, at least so far this season. And I think that it's very easy to get seduced by the finals run that they went on last year. But there's a reason why we don't see in the NBA 4 seeds, 5 seeds, 6 seeds, 8 seeds make the NBA finals very often. It's actually, in fact, a very predictive sport. As much as the playoffs are its own beast and teams can get the right matchup, etc., there are certain markers that I think you're looking for in the regular season for a team to be a championship contender. And I think that as long as the Heat of Spo, Jimmy, and Bam, they're going to have a chance. But, people are always saying things like, Boston has got to be so scared of the Heat, and Philly doesn't want to see it. And it's like, I don't buy it, man. These teams have made serious changes to their rosters over the summer, and I think that I don't put the Heat in that top 3 class for sure.
Really quick before we get to you, David, the net rating, I just looked it up, 1.1 for the Heat. So
Yeah.
better than what it was, wasn't it, by the end of last regular season?
It was negative. Last year they were
or
minus,
negative
yeah.
0.1. Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
it was basically neutral. But David, I don't know that I've asked you that question in a while about where you kind of are on the Heat. I think this question about what their ceiling is versus what their floor is an interesting one.
I'm pretty, I think, and aligned with what Rohan just said. I maintain pretty consistently also that I think this team is better than last year's, but I don't know that they'll go as far as they went last year because last year's run was so unpredictable and they had such incredible shooting and they got all these great contributions, and tie that together with some well-timed unfortunate injuries from opponents, and that certainly helped Miami along the way to their unrealistic path. So I don't know that they can duplicate that level of success, but I think it's still a better team. But I agree, and we just talked about this recently, that Jimmy Butler and that level of production that he gave us last year, I don't know that you can count on that to happen ever again. And given that, I don't know that Miami is going to be able to find any kind of similar recipe. And it might just be a matter of, like, you know, as I said, also a death by 1,000 cuts because of Miami's depth, and you're going to get those contributions from Duncan, and Jaime is going to have a big game at some point in the playoffs. And maybe that's unrealistic to look forward to, but I think that's just kind of the recipe for Miami's success this season. It's probably likely to replicate itself in the playoffs too. You know, they're a good team, and I again, I agree with what we're all saying here, and at the same time,
Well, I haven't said anything yet.
No, I know, but I know how you feel about this. But has Miami ever been a contender over the last 4 seasons with Jimmy Butler on the roster? Like, I don't think anybody's ever seen him that way.
No, it's
very good, and they've overachieved expectations every season.
It's a great point. I can't believe I'm usually the one that's kind of like putting just water on the fire here when Heat fans are getting ready to ramp up for a big playoff run. But I look at the East and I think Boston's really good, but I can't tell you that I trust them, man. I really don't. And I don't know.
They're really good, man. They're
really good. I just said they're really good.
You watched that Timberwolves game last night. It's like the reverse of every Miami Heat game, where in the fourth quarter the Heat have a lead, and you're seeing it whittle away. Last night the Thunder, they're losing. They kind of cut into the lead very late, but I don't think the Thunder ever felt truly seriously threatened. Whereas Boston, even without Porzingis, can just put together these two-way stretches of dominance that the Heat are simply not capable of.
Well, nobody else in the league is doing what Boston's doing. And to be clear, I do have them as, like, if I had to pick somebody to come out of the East, I would pick Boston. But I also can't sit here and tell you that I trust them the way that I trusted, like, one of those LeBron teams, you know, when he was at his peak, or those Warriors teams when they were at their peak, even though they're loaded with as much talent, arguably, as some of those squads. But I don't know. If this team can, I agree with David's point that this team is better than it was last year. The interesting thing here is that the East has gotten even better. Like, whatever margin Miami is improved by, the East is improved at a greater margin this year. And prompted because of the Heat. The Heat took out the Bucks, they made changes. The Heat took out the Celtics, they made changes. And that's sort of the irony in all of this. We're going to get to maybe some changes that the Heat can make before the deadline to maybe gear up for a run here. But then again, like, you never know what happens. And it kind of just feels like the Heat are relying a little bit on maybe a run, not like last year, because I don't know that they expect to shoot 1,000,000,000% from 3 again for an entire postseason. But, like, okay, one injury to a Celtic here. What if Porzingis goes down? I think the Celtics are a lot more vulnerable then, and that's a very plausible scenario. You know, who knows what happens with Philadelphia and Milwaukee? They kind of still have to prove it a little bit in terms of the postseason performance aspect of it. And so I think the Miami Heat are just the Pittsburgh Steelers. They never go in the playoffs as the number 1 seed or necessarily the favorite, but they're just going to go in, give themselves a chance, and they're going to play the numbers game over a matter of years and say, okay, a couple of these years, maybe we just sort of, things break our way, we break through, and it kind of goes our way a little bit. I don't know. Rohan, what do you think?
I think that's a good analogy. I think and to David's point, I think the one year that maybe there was a year where they were the 1 seed, and it felt like that was probably the best team they've had over the last few years. And I know what you're saying, David. It's like no one thought they would win, but that was probably their best team. And, you know, the team that I think had the best chance, like, that was a wide open year. I don't think they were viewed as a contender, but I don't think anyone was kind of viewed as a huge favorite that year. I don't think anyone was saying, like, this team is going to run away with it in the 2022 season. Even the Warriors were a little bit of a surprise that year.
No doubt.
It's interesting because I agree that the expectations are not high, but Jimmy, I think, has changed the calculus a little bit. And it's more like, what could he do if they had their version of the Derek White trade? One of those kinds of moves. What could they do if they made that kind of move to upgrade the roster a little bit? I think I've said this before. I've definitely tweeted it. I think we discussed it on this podcast. Like, I think if you gave Jimmy and Bam the Celtics supporting cast from the last 2 years, I think they could have won 2 titles in a row, to be perfectly honest. So that is, I think, what it comes down to is I think they can be better, but they have to find a way to thread the needle to make that kind of move.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this then. We'll talk about what kind of moves they can make, some potential areas of focus, areas of need that they might have. We'll do that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. I know we come to talk to, sports here on this show and to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. It's pretty scary out there. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if my son or anybody else that I know got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from getting the life-saving medication they might need. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, and many more. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jasemedical.com and complete your physical encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to Jase Medical, that's JASE medical.com, and use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Rohan, you've been pointing this out a lot before we get to some of the team needs and names that the Heat can target at the deadline. The fact that the Heat don't have a lineup that's played 80 minutes together, that's wild. We were talking about their injuries earlier.
Insane.
They've used 20 different starting lineups. It is insane that they can get to this point in the season and not have a lineup that has played that much. And one other stat here, they haven't had a single 5-man group that's played more than 10 games together this season. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this.
It's genuinely unbelievable. I think the leading lineup in the league is the Rockets starting 5 that's played over 400 minutes together. I mean, their lineups that have played more than 5 or 6 times what the Heat's leading lineup has played. I think the Celtics starting 5s over 300 minutes together played. These have serious ramifications. And I remember a couple years ago, the year that they lost to the Celtics in the conference finals, that whole year they never really had a solid closing group. And I think the big question ahead of the postseason was who's going to be the closing 5. And in a way, Spo's hand almost got dealt or forced because of the hero injury. It became Strus. Last year, similar situation. The lineup that they closed the Eastern Conference Finals and NBA Finals with has not played a minute together yet this season. That's even when the team was healthy. And that's Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, Jimmy Butler, Caleb Martin, and Bam Adebayo. They haven't played together. We just saw that group closing fourth quarters in the biggest possible moments, and they couldn't get a minute together on the floor yet this year. It's really remarkable. And, we have no idea what a possible playoff rotation would look like. We have no idea who their best 5 closers are. It's crazy.
I don't want to completely contradict what you're saying, because I know that there are concerns in that by that sense, but also, like, isn't that a positive too? Like, can it be viewed as a positive that all these players are getting this great experience, which has benefited Miami so much in the past? Like, Duncan Robinson obviously had a lot of experience, but I know the Miami mantra is kind of somewhat overplayed, but be ready, stay ready so you don't have to be ready or whatever it is. So I don't know. It's just, I think from Miami's perspective, like, all these players getting these kind of playoff type, I don't know, it's like the opportunity to contribute during the regular season, it's going to reap its benefits just as it has over the last 4 seasons during the postseason. That's just the way I see it.
I definitely don't think it's all bad. And you think about like Hawkins, for example, getting all these fourth quarter minutes, like his progression
more than anybody else on the team.
For sure. It's true. More than anybody else in the NBA for that matter. Leads the NBA in fourth quarter minutes. So it's not that there are no benefits to it, but again, when we're talking about the markers of what makes a championship team, that's not one, so that like, not knowing your rotation, not knowing your best five, like Haywood Highsmith, Cooper Moorhead tweeted this today. I'm constantly sending Coop texts about Haywood Highsmith. Like I think Haywood should be a starter again. Is that going to happen? Is that the plan? Like we saw that briefly. He got hurt.
What do you think the starting five should be for Miami?
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
If healthy.
I genuinely believe it should be Kyle, Jimmy, Duncan, Haywood, and Bam.
Yeah. Ooh. That's their best net rating lineup right now. So that's not Tyler Hero. That's Duncan Robinson in place for Tyler Hero. We've had that conversation a lot about which one of those players. I'm really intrigued by the lineup that they used against OKC with Tyler at point guard. And then if you put Jimmy Butler in there at the 2-guard spot, Jaime, you basically, I don't even know if you have a 2-guard or small forward. You basically just have Tyler Hero running point, Bam at center, and then you surround them with Nikola Jovic at power forward, Jaime Jaquez, and Jimmy Butler. That team's big, guys, like a lot of stuff.
You guys are putting Jovic in the starting 5 over Haywood and
I'm not
Caleb.
saying that that's the best lineup. I'm just saying I'm intrigued by it. And I've been intrigued by the Jovic experiment.
I doubt.
Ahead, David.
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but at the same time, I'm not a believer in Caleb. I don't know what's going to happen. No, man, listen, we love Caleb around these here parts. Big fan of his, been on the show, etc. At the same time, I don't know what's going to happen.
He threw a been on the show too. Wow. No, now kill him. Now.
No, it's not killing. It's just a contract year and the nagging injury, and it doesn't seem like he's ever, even when he's had moments this season, it hasn't really tied together. Either he's had a couple sparks offensively, and he's been really bad defensively, And given that, like, what are the expectations for him? And we're kind of talking about another player similar to what we were all so quick, and I don't mean us personally, but Heat fans were all so quick to talk crap about Max Strus and Gabe Vincent as these glorified role players. God damn it, Caleb Martin was out of the league 3 years ago, if not for the Miami Heat and Caron Butler knowing who the hell J. Cole is for some reason. Like, aside from that, Caleb Martin would be
he's one of the most popular rappers in the world. I'm not even a J. Cole fan.
It's Caron Butler having a personal relationship. Yeah.
Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
They're friends. That's the whole point. It's like Caleb Martin is like, he's really benefited from Heat culture and everything else. And Eastern Conference MVP, Eastern Conference Finals MVP notwithstanding, like, is Caleb Martin going to become that permanently, or is he going to go back to being the guy who was, one bad game away from
go off, and then we're going to end the Caleb Martin. We're going to close the Caleb Martin conveation because we don't want to do a whole podcast about somebody that's not even healthy right now.
I think Caleb, to your point, like struggled defensively. He's someone who's been a victim of all these, lineup changes and inconsistencies off the bench, starting, etc. Which guys is he playing with? Which guys is he not playing with? Like, I can't stress enough. Like, he doesn't need to be 25 point per game scorer, Caleb Martin, but the guy we saw defending in the playoffs when he played alongside who I think else should be starting on the team, he played really well. He performed really well in that role. He has not gotten single second an opportunity to be in that role again this year because of the guys in and out of the lineup. And that's part of the issue. And to me, Caleb is one of the few guys on this team with athleticism going toward the rim. Someone who's actually can help on some of these absurd fast break issues that they have. Like, to me, their big issue, and we'll get into this in trade targets, they just don't have anyone who collapses the paint. They don't have anyone who can finish at the rim on a consistent basis. Bam, I think, leads the team in rim restricted area field goal attempts at 4.2, which is not particularly high for a center. Again, there are forwards and guards that shoot more than that. So, he's someone who can provide that, and I think we're really good at it. And I think the Jovic stuff, I hate to be this guy, it's getting a little bit carried away from me. Like, there were moments of the game last night where he's missing defensive communications.
Whoa.
There was when the Thunder had their run to start the third quarter, there's one offensive possession where he just goes on the kind of a kamikaze drive and unleashes some kind of spinny hook in the lane. And it's like, you need to let him grow through these mistakes. I'm not saying he doesn't have potential, but when people are like, oh, like Joe Cronin, I bet you're sobbing watching this Jovic highlight. It's like, I don't think they care at all.
I think Jovic has a ton of potential. That's not breaking news. But also when you listen to Eric Spoelstra talk after these press conferences and he's asked about Nico, it's always, we're working with him, we're developing him, we like where he's going. I don't think the Heat are saying, and nobody on the Heat is saying this guy's ready to participate in the playoffs. This guy's ready to be a
I don't
major
think he
factor in
will
the
be
playoffs. And
in the rotation when the
I'm
team's
with
fully
you.
healthy. Yeah.
When you talk about their top 8 or 9 in a playoff rotation, it starts getting crowded real quick, David. It does. It gets crowded really quick. And you don't want to go 10, 11, 12 deep in the playoffs. You want to play 8. The Denver played 7 basically last year and won the finals. So I don't think that's even
it's a different recipe, though. I mean, they have
it is the recipe.
Jokic.
You don't want
to call it Jokic, though.
Historically, it's oft-used recipes to play 7 to 8.
You don't go 10 deep in the playoffs.
My favorite
why would you?
series
You play your best players.
Was 2018 Warriors Rockets, and by the end both teams were playing like 6 guys.
Yeah,
it was like
really forget
that, and to me that was the height of
your
basketball.
Starters minutes go up, number one. So that takes away minutes from the reserve guys, and then you play 3 guys off the bench, maybe, and like Rohan just said, like maybe 2, maybe 1 guy off the bench in the finals. Like you just play your best guys the most amount of minutes. That said,
that's on a team that has a disparity that's as wide as Bones Highland versus Nikola Jokic, but not for Miami, where I don't know that there's much of a difference between Jimmy Butler, as inconsistent as he might be, and somebody else deeper down on the rotation. That's all. I mean, look, we're talking about Caleb Martin, who may or may not start or may not play, depending on the whims of Eric Spoelstra on occasion. What's the difference between, how wide a margin or disparity is between Jimmy Butler and Caleb Martin on this team?
We'll find out.
First,
we know.
Caleb Martin was out of the league 3 years ago, and he's just a rapper's friend. And now it's him and Jimmy Butler.
What rappers does Jimmy Butler know? Huh?
None. Just country music players. That's it.
All right. We'll shelve this argument until the playoffs are actually around. The trade deadline's coming up February 8th. When we look at the roster, do the Heat need to make a move? We'll talk about that next.
Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports league in North America. It's so easy to play. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 players and their stat projections, and you can watch the winnings roll in. You want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill or comedian Andrew Schultz. Excuse me?
Not J. Cole, Meek Mill. I don't know what NBA players he knows. Deion Waiters.
All of 76ers. So, I mean,
James Harden. James Harden used to call Meek Mill when Meek Mill was in prison. True story.
Breaking news here. I don't know if that's breaking news.
That's excellent. You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you've got a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return a second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So go to prizepicks.com now /LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA and you get a first deposit match of up to $100. That's prizepicks.com /LockedOnNBA. Use that code LockedOnNBA. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Everydayers will be back on Monday morning with a recap of Sunday's game against the Hornets, but more importantly, Dwayne Wade night at Kaseya Center. Dwayne Wade's going to be doing interviews and things like that. I guess Rick Ross, another rapper better than J. Cole, doing a post-game performance. So that should be interesting. We should break down the Rick Ross post-game performance.
I thought it was DJ Khaled. Is it DJ Khaled?
Oh, I'm sorry. It is DJ Khaled. I'm mixing up my rappers. Rick Ross just did the Udonis Haslem. No, I was editing a story earlier about Rick Ross and the Udonis Haslem thing. I got all my wires crossed here. All righty. Rohan, do the Heat need to make a move before the deadline?
So here's the thing, because I know people, this is like a yearly conversation with this team. Do they need to make a move?
The deadline happens every year.
Right.
But
it's
wow.
It feels like Heat Twitter is especially very trade pilled. Let me put it that way. It's it's all about the next big move, etc. Here's where I am. I love everyone on this team. If they don't make a move, that's fine. It's been a fun team to watch. This regular season has been way more fun than last year's. I think they have a lot of interesting pieces. I would be happy to watch this team give it their all, give it their best, and let the chips fall where they may. Having said that, do I believe this current team, as presently constructed, can win a championship? No. Unless several things break their way and, basically every star player gets injured, then maybe, they have a good chance. But
which is not a plan.
Right, exactly. Assuming everyone is healthy, which is how all these teams are operating, I don't think the Heat is presently constructed can win a title. The tricky situation therein is if they want to pursue Donovan Mitchell, who I would be surprised if he's traded during the season.
Same.
They have to find a way to make a move that doesn't preclude them from trading for someone like Donovan in the summer. So it's what are the kinds of players you can get without giving up picks is really what it comes down to. And that's what's going to be a very interesting calculus for them. Are they going to be willing to take back long-term salary in return for Kyle Lowry? That's another tricky situation for them. They might
not just long-term salary, like a salary dump. That's what we're talking about. A player that's being overpaid for multiple years.
Right.
Elsewhere.
So it's going to be tricky. I do think there are moves out there, though. I think Rozier is someone who could genuinely help this team. He has great playoff experience. He was a starting point guard for the Celtics team that made the conference finals without Kyrie Irving. I think he can hold up defensively. And it's more about what does he bring to the team that they don't currently have? It's rim pressure. I think he's close to 5 attempts in the restricted area game. I believe it was 4.9 last time I checked. Like he's right up there with guys like Anthony Edwards, Damian Lillard in terms of attempts in the restricted area. We're always talking about the Heat. They shoot so well from 3, but they don't generate enough. That's because, they can't collapse the paint. They can't really play a drive and kick game. Having someone like that in place of Lowry, I think would genuinely make genuinely make a significant difference, even though I think Lowry's played his ass off this year and played big minutes for a team that's really needed him. So it's not a shade to Lowry, but as much as I think Heat fans love their role players, sometimes that can prevent them from realizing that maybe there are better guys out there.
I don't think Kyle fits in that category of players.
Right.
That he can't love.
Yeah, fair. I also think I don't think they would do this for a number of reasons. Like Jeremy Grant would be a great fit on this team. You look at his 3-point percentage the last couple of years, he's close to 40%.
Yep.
He gives them size. He's not a great rebounder, but he's a great defender, multiple positions. He was huge for the Nuggets the year they made the conference finals in the bubble. A much improved 3-point shooter. You think about what he could do in a series against Boston. If you have Bam, Jimmy, Hawkes, and Jeremy Grant together on the floor, that is an incredibly switchable defense.
Yeah. And his shot chart has gotten so much better, to your point, over the couple of years. It's basically everything's at the rim or catch and shoot threes.
Right. And then there's Bojan Bogdanovic and Monte Morris in Detroit. Morris hasn't played that yet this year, but again, someone who has playoff experience with the Nuggets, good defender. Bogdanovic, another guy that gets to the rim well. He's a better mid-range shooter than Tyler Hero, more efficient scorer than Tyler Hero. And you put him in a role where he's the 3rd or 4th scorer on a team, I think that's a great role for him. So, and the advantage of the Pistons one is Morris and Bogdanovic are both expiring deals. And Morris could be brought back as a bridge point guard, someone who could be on the team for a couple years. Bogdanovic is older, but if he re-signs, it's probably not going to be at his current number. So that one would give them some optionality. The trick is, can you do that trade without giving up the picks that you might need for a Mitchell pursuit? That's what makes it tricky.
Or the young guys. I think that there's something to be said about keeping Jaime and Jovic around just to see, okay, which one of these guys is Cleveland going to want in a potential Donovan Mitchell deal, because those are important assets for that kind of trade too. The other thing I like, and David and I have had the Terry Rozier conversation. We like the fit. If Charlotte called Miami
I felt
right
like
now,
David was giving me a look. I felt like David was like,
I was surprised that he was pro Rozier. I really was, but he was.
David knows ball. That's why.
It's not his kind of player usually. That's that's not one for the David heads there. But
no, it's shades of Dion Waiters, who obviously I'm a big fan of.
Dion Waiters, whose rim pressure would be welcome on this team.
I've said that before. I talked
baby.
about that. Yeah, when he had that workout, I was like, yes, bring him back.
Yes,
get close. Yes, absolutely.
But I like also the Rozier fit. And somebody, what was the other name that you said? Jeremy Grant. I like the Jeremy Grant fit too. And there are some concerns that you have about bringing on long-term salary in terms of what it does against the second apron next year and the flexibility to maybe bring in a Donovan Mitchell or something like that. The great thing about a guy like Rozier and Jeremy Grant is that both of them could be used in a trade to get Donovan Mitchell or another superstar player. Terry Rozier's he's not a great player, but his contract is only going to be that much chunkier and better as it goes on.
It's
right?
also
It's only a year away from
partial
being
guarantee
expiring.
in his last year. I think next year's the
It's like
last
$2
fully
million
guaranteed
off.
for-
It's barely
yeah,
partially
right.
guaranteed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very tradable contract. And in the case of Jeremy Grant, wouldn't he be awesome on Cleveland if they were to move off of Donovan Mitchell? He's sort of exactly what they've been missing, and so he could be a cornerstone of that package going out. So if I'm the Heat, that's also part of my calculus too. Is do we want like kind of bit expiring contracts like Amani Morris or Bojan Bogdanovic that gives us that cap sheet flexibility in the immediate term, or if we're not going to go in that direction, because I don't know what the Pistons will be looking. Are they going to be asking for a pick there? Like if they do that, you can't do it. It doesn't matter what pick it is. The Heat don't have that many picks.
I think you have to be like Lowry, and maybe as many seconds as you're allowed to trade. It's maybe what that
they have one.
Yeah,
it would, and I don't think you could trade it because it's a 2026 Lakers pick, and that could be a good pick. So maybe you do it in that deal, but maybe it's like here Lowry and all the cash that we're allowed to give you. Like is that
then
good?
That's where you have to consider Jovic, honestly.
And then you got to consider Jovic, and then that could be a little problematic. So to your point, it's tough, kind of going for it now versus trying to keep that bridge open to potentially get Donovan Mitchell.
So
that's a hard thing.
I think Hero and 3 picks would get it done for Mitchell. Like Hero Hawkes and 3 picks. I think that would get it done for Mitchell. So you got to avoid trading those 2 and 3 first somehow. And that's where I think personally, because I think they got to try it this year for Jimmy's sake, Jovic would be on the table for me. And I know people are going to go crazy after what he did the last couple games, but
all the pressure that the Warriors are on with Steph, the Lakers are on with LeBron and all this stuff, it's the same thing. It's like, hey, are you really trying to do a 2-timeline thing, or do you really want to go for it? And it feels like the Heat are trying to have their cake and eat it too a little bit when it comes to those guys. I also understand the point of, hey, like the second luxury tax, we have a lot of extensions coming up, all this stuff. So even just from like a roster like cap standpoint, it makes more sense to have guys on rookie scale contracts. I understand that part of the argument, but to your point, Rohan, like maybe there is something to be said about just going for it right now and then just say and screw the future because we got the dude right now, Jimmy Butler. Bam's obviously ready, and maybe you just get as much help as you want. David, what do you think about all this?
I think they'd be willing to trade picks and players if there was one player that they could acquire that would be a surefire deal to put them over the top from where they currently are. And I don't know that player is available. It might be Mitchell. I don't know if they view him in that sense. Probably do. But other than that, I mean, we're talking about Jeremy Grant, Terry Rozier, and what it would take
Grant
to acquire those players.
Ron,
sorry. If they could get Grant without giving up a pick, it might require Duncan. Now, Duncan's again played his ass off this year. Been best year of his career. This is what it comes down to. Is like people want the team to win. I think Jeremy Grant, as much as I love Duncan, I think Jeremy Grant's a better player.
That's fair,
but I don't think that's debatable.
No, I agree 100%. I think the threat of what Duncan provides and what he's capable of, and I know he's had a really, really good season and everything else, but even we saw it last year too. Like the idea of Duncan and this floor spacing and the fact that he is a deadly shooter on occasion. I don't know. I feel like Miami would need that as part of their
keeping
arsenal.
Hero in this. Are you keeping Hero in this deal, Rohan?
Of course. I mean, Grant.
So you still have a floor spacer.
Grant's a good player, and I'm not totally sure what his value is, but that contract is working against Portland somewhat.
That's right.
The earlier you try to trade for him, the more years he has left. Works in the team trying to acquire him's favor.
So,
but
hypothetically,
even Tyler seems like the skill that's the least irreplaceable. You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like you can get enough to kind of balance out what Tyler has provided this season. I know it seems like I've been overly critical of him in the past and everything else, but I just feel like that's the player that you're probably most likely to trade in any of these scenarios. Maybe not for Rozier or Grant.
I think Tyler's only being moved for Mitchell at this point.
I agree with that.
Fair enough.
I agree with that. Fair. And that's not even like an opinion. I just think that that's kind of where the reporting has led us. But the deal in the trade machine would be if we included Duncan and Kyle Lowry. And I agree with you, Rohan. I don't think if Portland was actively looking to shop Jeremy Grant, I haven't heard anything that they are actively looking for it. I don't know. Joe Cronin is very active in regard to much of anything in terms of making phone calls, but
it was this summer. He just doesn't take them. That's all.
But he's got 5 years on this contract, which is crazy, and it's not a good deal for Portland. He's 29 years old. If he's not a salary dump, that seems harsh for a guy who's a good player.
But they'd like to get off that money.
I would imagine they would, right? There's got to be some buyer's remorse there after they signed him and then had to and then Damian Lillard asked for a trade. So you could give them Lowry, and that does it. It's like, hey, jail out a free card. Here you go, buddy. We know that Cronin's not going to do that. I don't think any GM would do that. Just Lowry for Grant straight up, because I don't know. Also, if you're Portland, like, why are you in a rush to create cap space? Nobody's signing with your team, so it's fine. But then you throw in Duncan Robinson, who's a good player.
I think there are reasons for them to do it, especially if you're looking at, Grant will still be on the books. Yeah, like Shaedon Sharp's going to need an extension in a couple years already. Scoot, I mean, he's 4 years away, but if Grant's on the books for that year, Ayton's on the books for that year, etc., it would give them a level of flexibility to get off Grant's deal. Now, again, can they do it without giving up a first? Like, what if it had to be Lowry and Jovic for Jeremy Grant? I think you'd have to think hard about that trade if you're Miami.
You would absolutely have to think hard. That's the definition of the trade that you have a meeting about. I don't know what they would say. I don't know what I would say, but you have to think hard about it, right?
Yeah.
Because Grant's 29, square in his prime, right there with Jimmy and Bam, and could fit alongside those guys. He would be a great fit. One other version of this would be Lowry and Duncan Robinson to Portland for Grant and Malcolm Brogdon. And you might have to throw in Jovic in that kind of construction too. I don't think you would be able to throw in a first-round pick if you're Miami, if you want to keep the optionality open for Donovan Mitchell over the summer. But that would be the other version of it, right? Mm-hmm. David, you hate that.
No, I don't have any faith in Brogdon as a playoff performer.
Or
I like Brogdon.
Player.
It's just him staying healthy is.
I wouldn't go for Brogdon.
That's the tricky part. Yeah,
he's like one of those NBA Twitter guys that he's a really good player, but he's kind of overrated in terms of value. He's like,
well, he played for Boston. Value increases exponentially.
I think he's good. I mean, there was a time where the Bucks looked like absolute fools for getting rid of him and keeping Eric Bledsoe. I mean, that was a thing too when he was on the Pacers. Even that
every team gets better when they trade Malcolm Brogdon away.
I think the bigger
I don't know
issue
what that is. I don't know what it means. It's a point.
I mean, the teams that traded him did upgrade. I mean, the Bucks eventually got Drew Holiday. I think people thought they were worse with Bledsoe and they gave him the extension.
Yes.
I think the bigger issue is Brogdon's health. But next year's the last year of his deal, so that's part of it. But I agree. I mean, he's making a lot of money for them. I don't see them taking on Grant and Brogdon's contracts.
Me neither. But the Grant thing is really interesting.
But I mean, do we have any faith in the ability for Brian in the front office? And maybe it's been overstated over the offseason and everything else because of all the contention between the two fan bases. But do you think Portland and Cronin would play ball?
If both teams are making a deal that's going to be better for them, yeah, they'll do it.
Mm-hmm. Unless Jeremy Grant comes out and says, "I only want to get traded to the Miami Heat," then that might be a problem.
Well, what he's got to do is come out and say, "I only want to play for the Bucks."
There it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
that would be smart agenting. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. Rohan, thanks so much for joining us on the show on short notice. We really appreciate it. You can find his work over at Sports Illustrated. The podcast is called
My Podcast?
Yeah, don't you have a podcast on Sports Illustrated?
Okay, I appear on a podcast, just the crossover podcast on Sports Illustrated. You could be your second listen of the day after Locked On Heat.
Oh man.
Yeah.